Hey guys, tonight we are going to dim the harsh modern lights and travel back to the soot-stained laboratories of the late Victorian era, where the race to harness electric light wasn't a spark of genius, but a slow, smoldering competition. You've probably seen that iconic picture of Thomas Edison, the Wizard of Menlo Park, holding up his famous bulb, right? The very symbol of American ingenuity. Well, you're about to slip into the drowsy, gas-lit streets of Newcastle, England, where a quiet chemist named Joseph Swan had already been demonstrating a functional electric light bulb years before Edison filed his famous patent. Imagine yourself standing there, the air thick with the sickly sweet smell of coal gas lighting the main street, when suddenly a soft, stable new light glows steadily behind a window, casting no soot, no flicker. It's a magic that's been pursued for decades. But the story you were taught in school, that Edison simply invented it, is about as complete as a Victorian bathing suit. It's the popular narrative, meticulously crafted by Edison himself, and tonight we're going to peel back the layers of that myth. You'll soon realize that Edison wasn't a lone genius. He was a brilliant systems engineer, and arguably the greatest self-promoter who ever lived, building his success on a foundation laid by others. You probably won't survive this deep dive without questioning everything you thought you knew about your light switch. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Edison's famous bulb lie. The introduction sets the scene, questioning Edison's primary claim to the invention. We begin in the dusty, cluttered lab of Thomas Edison, but first we need a flashback, about 77 years earlier, to 1802. That's when the English chemist Sir Humphry Davy showcased the world's first sustained electric light. It was called the arc lamp, and it wasn't a bulb in the sense we know it. You had two charcoal electrodes, and when you passed a massive amount of current through them, they produced an intensely bright, terrifyingly white arc of light. Imagine two tiny suns trying to escape a box. It was effective, but utterly impractical for your drawing room. It was deafeningly loud, consumed power like a thirsty steam engine, and burned out rapidly. It was perfect for lighthouses and public squares, but definitely not for a quiet evening of needlepoint. That was the first of our gentle jokes. It's getting late after all. For decades, inventors were obsessed with the idea of incandescence, making a filament glow without burning it up. The essential problem was finding a material with high electrical resistance that could withstand extremely high temperatures inside a perfect vacuum. You see, without a perfect vacuum, the oxygen rapidly oxidizes the filament, turning your magical new light into a brief, blinding flash followed by a puff of smoke. Not exactly a selling point. Fast forward to the 1870s. This is where Edison, always looking for a market, spotted the perfect technological gap. Gas lighting was widespread, but it was dirty, hot, and required constant maintenance. Plus, it kept burning down entire towns. Edison didn't want to invent a bulb, he wanted to invent the entire system of commercial power and distribution. He wasn't just chasing the light, he was chasing the money. When Edison triumphantly announced in 1878 that he had cracked the secret of the light bulb before he actually had a durable one, it caused a panic among the gas companies. That's our mainstream historical fact. Edison's brilliant initial move was a press campaign, not a finished product. His initial claim used a carbonized cardboard filament that lasted maybe a few minutes tops. Now here's our quirky tidbit. To keep the press from knowing the truth, Edison would reportedly hold brief, highly controlled demonstrations, quickly ushering the reporters out before the prototypes could fail. He was, to put it mildly, an absolute master of spin. Historians still argue whether Edison's early hype was justifiable market-making or outright fraud designed to depress his competitors' stock prices. This is the background we need to understand the plight of the British chemist who was quietly doing the actual scientific work.
Precursors, the arc light. This section explores Humphry Davy's powerful but impractical electric arc lamp from the early 1800s. So, while Edison was busy giving highly edited previews to American journalists, the focus shifts back across the pond to Joseph Wilson Swan, a chemist and physicist in the industrial north of England. Remember those brief, flashy arc lamps from the early 1800s? Swan was one of the many who tried to refine that idea into something useful, but he eventually pivoted to the far more challenging problem of incandescence. Swan was not the slick businessman Edison was. He was the classic obsessive Victorian amateur scientist, the kind who tinkered with dangerous chemicals in his shed while his wife worried about the smell of ether on his waistcoat. By the 1860s, Swan had successfully created a working, if short-lived, incandescent lamp. His bulb used a thin strip of carbonized paper, our first critical element, inside an evacuated glass vessel. But here's the kicker. His invention failed to catch on primarily for two reasons. First, the vacuum pumps of the day were terrible. You couldn't get enough air out of the bulb to prevent the carbon from quickly oxidizing. It would glow beautifully for a minute or two, then poof, darkness. Second, and this is our mainstream historical fact for this section, there was no adequate electrical distribution system to power it. It's all well and good to light one house with a massive, expensive battery bank, but that doesn't launch a global industry. Swan's work was fundamentally correct, but the surrounding technology wasn't ready. Now for a quirky or fringe tidbit. Swan's early carbon filaments were actually made from carbonized thread, which had been treated with sulfuric acid to parchmentize it. A genuinely odd material choice that sounds more like a recipe for a soggy science project than a global utility. He was effectively turning cotton into something like paper and then burning it in the absence of air to create pure carbon. Imagine the smell in that lab. Edison, the master aggregator of ideas, was certainly aware of this British work. He had agents and spies, researchers, on the ground everywhere, noting every patent and every public demonstration. He wasn't inventing in a void. He was inventing in a crowded, competitive field. And he had one advantage. He had dedicated a huge team and immense capital to solve the system problem, not just the bulb problem. This is where historians still argue whether the light bulb should be defined as the physical glowing object itself or the entire commercial apparatus, dynamo, wiring, switches, sockets, needed to make it safe and affordable for the masses. If you define it as the system, Edison wins. If you define it as the first stable glowing vessel, well, let's keep listening.
Swan's carbon victory. We investigate Joseph Swan's parallel development of a working carbon filament bulb in England years before Edison. By the late 1870s, technology caught up to Joseph Swan's earlier insights. The most important advance was the Sprengel mercury pump, a device capable of pulling a much higher vacuum inside the glass bulb. Remember how the lack of a good vacuum was the first problem that plagued his 1860s design? Now, with the vastly improved vacuum technology, Swan was able to return to his beloved carbonized cotton thread filament, remember that peculiar chemical process, and finally get it to glow for a usable length of time. This brings us to our mainstream historical fact. In December 1878, Joseph Swan publicly demonstrated a functioning, long-lasting incandescent lamp in Newcastle, England. This demonstration occurred nearly a full year before Edison filed his crucial patent claim using a similar carbon filament. Swan installed his bulbs in his own home, making it the first house in the world to be lit by electricity, and later, dramatically, in the Savoy Theatre in London, to the absolute astonishment of the audience. The light wasn't just on, it was stable and soft, a world away from the sputtering, hissing arc lamps. Swan had solved the primary chemical and physical problem.
Now, let's look at a quirky or fringe tidbit that shows how similar these parallel discoveries were. Edison's team, in a frantic effort to find a better filament material than the cardboard they started with, famously tested thousands of substances, from coconut fiber to fishing line. Their breakthrough came with carbonized bamboo fiber, which gave them an impressive lifespan of over 1,200 hours. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Swan was perfecting his parchmentized cotton filament. Both men arrived at the same fundamental conclusion. Carbon was the material, and a near-perfect vacuum was the prerequisite. Swan's early success meant he had patent rights in England that were absolutely ironclad. This simultaneous discovery is where the accusation of stealing finds its footing. Edison had an established international network. It is highly improbable that he didn't know about Swan's public demonstrations in late 1878 and throughout 1879. Did he steal the filament material? Not exactly. Both were working on the same principle, but Swan was demonstrably first to the post with a working, publicly demonstrated, stable carbon lamp. Edison's genius was in realizing that Swan's carbon was the right material, and then, most crucially, finding a specific, cheaper, and longer-lasting form of carbon, bamboo, and applying his vast resources to the commercial distribution. Historians still argue whether Edison's adoption of the carbon filament so shortly after Swan's public success constitutes independent invention or simply an expedient appropriation of an idea already proven viable. The legal system, as you'll see, certainly had its own answer. The legal battle begins. This covers the confusing and dramatic patent and trademark lawsuits between Swan and Edison across 2 continents. When Edison finally filed his patent in October 1879 for an incandescent lamp using a carbon filament, the battle lines were immediately drawn, especially in Britain, where Joseph Swan's claims were strongest. The subsequent legal skirmishes were a spectacle, perfectly encapsulating the fierce, often cutthroat competition of the late 19th century industrial age. You see the wealthy, politically connected American titan, Edison, squaring off against the reserved, scientifically rigorous British chemist Swan. It was David versus Goliath, except Goliath had better PR. Swan's company, the Swan Electric Light Company, sued Edison's British subsidiary for patent infringement almost immediately. Our mainstream historical fact for this section is that the British courts unequivocally sided with Joseph Swan. In 1883, the High Court of Justice ruled that Edison's English patent was invalid because Swan had already publicly demonstrated and patented the key elements of a carbon filament in an evacuated glass bulb several years prior. This was a massive blow to Edison's ambition to dominate the global lighting market. To protect his assets and prevent further disastrous court rulings, which could have resulted in injunctions preventing him from selling any bulbs at all in the lucrative British market, Edison had to make a move. Here's a quirky or fringe tidbit. In the British lawsuits, Edison attempted to invalidate Swan's patent by pointing to an even earlier patent for a carbonized paper lamp filed by an American named John Wellington Starr in 1845. Starr had died poor and his work was largely forgotten, but Edison tried to use it to argue that Swan's idea wasn't original either, hoping to destroy both patents. It was a classic, if I can't have it, nobody can move, but the courts ultimately still favored the first practical demonstration, which was Swan's. The pressure mounted. Edison's company was essentially locked out of one of the world's largest industrial economies. They were forced to the bargaining table. The realization dawned that fighting each other was only costing them millions and clearing the path for other competitors. This is where historians still argue whether the merger was an amicable business decision driven by market reality or a forced capitulation by Edison following a devastating legal defeat. Given Edison's personality, the latter seems more likely. The legal defeat proved that, at least in the eyes of the British law, Swan was the true inventor of the key component, the carbon lamp.
The merge and legacy. The final historical section details how the rivals eventually joined forces, leading to widespread commercial success. The culmination of the transatlantic patent wars led to a decision that benefited both men and, crucially, accelerated the adoption of electric light across the UK. In 1883, the Edison and Swan companies merged
to form the Edison and Swan United Electric Light Company, affectionately known as Ediswan. This is our mainstream historical fact. The Edison and Swan merger was a direct result of the British court ruling against Edison's patent claims. This newly unified company was now perfectly positioned to dominate the British market by combining the best of both worlds. Ediswan's bulbs were a beautiful hybrid of their competing designs. They utilized the superior and cheaper bamboo/cellulose filament, which Edison's team had perfected and which offered greater longevity, inside the Swan bulb design, which had the undeniable advantage of holding the valid British patent. This combination eliminated the legal risk and allowed the company to focus on mass production and distribution. While Swan had the initial brilliance of the working lamp, Edison provided the infrastructure, capital, and global network to turn that lamp from a laboratory curiosity into a household necessity. Here's our quirky tidbit to wrap up the invention phase. Later in his career, Joseph Swan went on to develop a new process for making his carbon filaments by squeezing nitrocellulose through tiny holes to form a consistent fiber. This same process, slightly modified, was later used to create the first artificial textile, rayon. So the same chemist who helped light your living room with a long-lasting electric bulb also inadvertently helped dress you in artificial silk. A fantastic legacy indeed. The final piece of the puzzle, and the ultimate reason why Edison gets the credit today, is tied to his success in the US. While he was forced to partner with Swan in Britain, his US patents were more resilient, and he never faced the same legal defeat there. The combination of his superior bamboo filament and his complete power system, including the first central power station in New York City in 1882, cemented his reputation in the US. Historians still argue whether Swan's eventual knighthood, Sir Joseph Swan in 1904, was a belated national acknowledgement of his critical and often overshadowed role in the invention of the practical light bulb, or an attempt to rebalance the historical scales against the colossal shadow cast by Edison. The answer is likely yes. Edison didn't steal the idea, but he certainly took an incomplete invention, perfected the most practical part, the system, and then used his wealth and legal might to force the original inventor into a partnership, ultimately absorbing the credit for the entire invention in the public eye. Now, as the memory of the patent wars and the glowing bamboo filaments fades, you can feel the warmth of the modern LED light above you. It's so quiet, so efficient, a direct descendant of the fragile, sputtering creations of those Victorian chemists. Imagine the intense pressure, the dizzying ambition, and the sheer volume of trial and error that took place in those dusty labs, all so you could simply flip a switch without fear of a fire or an explosion. You realize that nearly every modern convenience is not the product of a single eureka moment, but a slow, collaborative march of human effort, often punctuated by bitter lawsuits and overshadowed figures. Let the quiet hum of your fan or the distant sounds of your home settling wash over you. There's no more need to worry about carbonized thread or the perfect vacuum. Just let the gentle current of sleep take you now, resting peacefully in the light perfected by two rivals who became reluctant partners. Everything is stable. Everything is calm. Sweet dreams.